The smell of paint thinner clung to the air as Lila Thompson wiped her hands on an old rag. Her fingers were smudged with vivid streaks of blue and gold, remnants of her latest painting, which stood half-finished on the easel before her. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the air conditioner, a sound she barely registered anymore. Sunlight streamed through the large gallery windows, bathing the room in a soft golden glow that contrasted with the anxiety gnawing in her chest. In her hands was a letter she had read at least 3 times. Each word felt heavier than the last. The bold insignia of Morgan Enterprises at the top of the page seemed to mock her. She read the key phrases again, as if the meaning might somehow change. Your property has been earmarked for demolition as part of the upcoming urban redevelopment project. You have 30 days to vacate. Her knees threatened to buckle. It wasn't just the building. It was her father's gallery, a haven that had housed his artwork, and then her own after he passed. Losing it would mean losing the last tangible piece of his legacy. The chime of the front door startled her. Sophia Reed strolled in, holding 2 cups of coffee. Her dark bob framed her sharp cheekbones, and her journalistic instincts seemed perpetually on high alert. She glanced at Lila and immediately picked up on her distress. "Hey, what's wrong?" Sophia asked, setting the coffees on the counter. Her voice carried the clipped efficiency of someone used to digging for answers. Wordlessly, Lila handed her the letter. Sophia scanned it quickly, her expression shifting from curiosity to indignation. "They can't just do this," she said, her voice rising. "You can fight it. There has to be a way to—" "How, Sophia?" Lila interrupted, her tone weary. "It's Morgan Enterprises. They own half the town already. Who's going to stop them?" Sophia folded the letter carefully, her jaw tightening. "Then we find a way. You're not going to lose this place. Not after everything you've done to keep it going." Lila looked around the gallery. The paintings on the walls, the shelves of sketchbooks and art supplies, the warm wooden floors, all of it felt like an extension of her soul. Could she really lose it all in just 30 days? "Look," Sophia said, softening her tone. "I've dealt with companies like this before. They're all talk until someone pushes back. Maybe we can—" The sound of the gallery door chime interrupted her. A young couple walked in, their expressions lighting up as they admired the artwork. Sophia gestured for Lila to go to them. "Go," she said. "I'll hang around and brainstorm while you handle business." Lila forced a smile and approached the couple, though her mind was still racing. She answered their questions about the paintings, even managing to sell a small piece, but the weight of the letter lingered in her thoughts like a dark cloud. Later that evening, after the gallery had closed, Lila sat in the small back room that doubled as her studio. The letter lay on the work table next to her sketch pad, taunting her. She tried to sketch, but her mind was too scattered. Her thoughts kept circling back to the same question: how do I save this place? Her phone buzzed on the table, breaking her concentration. It was Sophia. "Lila," she said without preamble, "I've been digging into Morgan Enterprises. Their CEO, Richard Morgan, is as ruthless as they come, but his son, Victor, has been overseeing this redevelopment project. Maybe you could—" "Stop," Lila cut in. "What are you suggesting? That I beg this Victor Morgan for mercy?" "No. I'm suggesting you talk to him. See if there's any wiggle room. From what I've read, he's not as cutthroat as his father. It's worth a shot." Lila sighed, rubbing her temples. "I'll think about it," she said, though she doubted she'd act on the idea. Victor Morgan adjusted his tie as he stepped out of the sleek black sedan. The air was crisp with the faint scent of rain-soaked pavement, a sharp contrast to the sterile conference rooms he usually inhabited. His assistant, Simon, hurried to keep up with him, clutching a tablet loaded with project updates and schedules. "Sir, we're scheduled to meet with the local contractors at noon," Simon said, glancing at his watch. Victor barely nodded, his attention elsewhere. His eyes drifted to the quaint row of shops across the street, where a small art gallery stood out like a stubborn relic. He frowned, trying to remember why it seemed familiar. "Simon, what's the deal with that gallery?" he asked, gesturing toward it. Simon glanced at his tablet. Thompson Art Gallery. Scheduled for demolition in Phase 2 of the project. It's small, underperforming, and sitting on prime real estate. Victor nodded absently, but the name tugged at something in his memory. He crossed the street, his polished shoes clicking on the pavement, and paused in front of the gallery's window. Through the glass, he could see a young woman at work, her focus entirely on the canvas before her. The sight of her stirred an odd feeling in him. Something about her face seemed familiar, though he couldn't place where he'd seen her before. He decided to step inside. Lila glanced up as the door chime rang, her brush pausing mid-stroke. The man who entered was sharply dressed, his tailored suit fitting like a second skin. He exuded an air of authority that immediately set her on edge. "Can I help you?" she asked, keeping her tone neutral. "I was just admiring your work," he said, his voice smooth but distant. His eyes scanned the room, lingering briefly on her painting before returning to her face. There was something unnerving about his gaze, as if he were assessing her rather than her art. She straightened her posture, trying to mask her unease. "This piece is beautiful," he said, nodding toward the painting she'd been working on. "May I ask what inspired it?" Lila hesitated. "Personal experiences," she said curtly. She didn't owe him an explanation. Victor studied her for a moment before offering a polite smile. "I won't take up more of your time. Thank you for indulging my curiosity." As he left, Lila felt a strange mix of relief and unease. There was something about him she couldn't quite put her finger on. Later that night, Victor sat in his hotel room, reviewing project plans on his laptop. His thoughts kept drifting back to the gallery and the woman inside. He opened a file on the project's second phase and found the details on Thompson Art Gallery. Something about the name clicked. Years ago, during his early days at Morgan Enterprises, he'd been part of a hiring decision that hadn't seemed significant at the time. A young artist named Lila Thompson had applied for a partnership role, but he dismissed her portfolio as amateurish. Could it be the same person? The realization unsettled him. He closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. For reasons he couldn't yet articulate, he decided to delay the demolition of the gallery. "Simon," he said aloud, grabbing his phone. When Simon answered, Victor gave a simple order: put the gallery demolition on hold. "I'll be handling it personally." Lila leaned back in the creaking chair in her studio, the weight of the demolition notice pressing on her chest. It had been days since she received the letter, and every attempt to brainstorm a solution felt like running in circles. Her sketchpad sat untouched on the desk before her, the blank pages a reflection of her paralyzed thoughts. Her phone buzzed, the screen lighting up with Sophia's name. "Tell me you have good news," Lila said as she answered. Sophia's voice came through, brisk and determined. "Not good news exactly, but I might have something useful. I've been looking into Victor Morgan. You know, the guy overseeing this whole demolition nightmare." "Don't remind me," Lila muttered. "Listen," Sophia continued, "he's different from his father. People describe him as pragmatic, not ruthless. It might be worth talking to him, seeing if there's a way to negotiate." Lila snorted. "Negotiate with a Morgan? You're joking, right?" "I'm serious," Sophia said. "The gallery means everything to you. It's worth a shot, isn't it?" Lila hesitated, her heart tugging in two directions. She hated the idea of pleading with the enemy, but the alternative was unthinkable. After a long pause, she said, "Fine. If I see him, I'll talk to him. But I'm not holding my breath." 2 days later, Lila got her chance. She was locking up the gallery when a sleek black car pulled up across the street. Out stepped Victor Morgan, his crisp suit and polished demeanor out of place against the weathered storefronts. He crossed the street with purpose, his eyes fixed on Lila. "Miss Thompson," he said, his tone measured and polite. "Do you have a moment to talk?" Lila folded her arms, squinting at him suspiciously. "What could we possibly have to talk about, Mr. Morgan?" Victor offered a small smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm here to discuss your gallery. I believe we may have a mutual interest in preserving it, Her eyebrows shot up. Preserving it? Isn't your company the one trying to destroy it? He nodded, unfazed by her sharp tone. That's why I'm here, to offer a solution. May we go inside? Lila hesitated, then unlocked the door and stepped aside, gesturing for him to enter. Inside, Victor scanned the room, his eyes lingering on the paintings. He walked to one near the back, a piece Lila had created in her early 20s. This is remarkable, he said, his voice softer than she expected. Your work has a unique perspective. I didn't invite you here for compliments, Lila snapped. Get to the point. Victor turned to face her, his expression serious. Morgan Enterprises plans to redevelop this area. Yes, but I believe your gallery has value beyond the land it occupies. I'd like to propose a deal. Host a charity exhibit for our company, and in return, we'll halt the demolition and provide funding for renovations. Lila blinked, stunned. You're serious? Entirely, Victor said. This could benefit both of us. Your gallery gets a second chance, and we fulfill our community outreach goals. It's a win-win. Lila's jaw tightened. The proposal sounded too good to be true, and her instincts screamed that there had to be a catch. What's in it for you? She demanded. Victor hesitated, then said, Your gallery is unique. It would reflect well on our project to support local culture. That's all. Lila studied him, searching for cracks in his polished facade. Finally, she said, I need time to think about it. Of course, Victor said, inclining his head. Take all the time you need. But remember, the clock is ticking. As he left, Lila felt a strange mix of anger and hope. The deal might save her gallery, but at what cost? The gallery felt unusually empty the next morning as Lila stood in front of the easel, staring at her unfinished painting. Victor's proposal had planted a seed of doubt in her mind. Could she really trust Morgan? Sophia arrived mid-morning, her usual coffee in hand. You've been quiet, she said, sitting on the counter. What's going on? Lila recounted Victor's visit, her voice laced with frustration. Wait, Sophia said, setting her cup down. He offered to fund renovations and halt the demolition? That's huge, Lila. It's too good to be true, Lila replied. There has to be a catch. Sophia shrugged. Maybe, but do you really have a choice? You've got less than 30 days. Lila sighed, rubbing her temples. I hate that he has all the power here. You're not powerless, Sophia said firmly. If you take the deal, you can still fight for what's yours. On your terms. 2 days later, Lila called Victor. They met at a local cafe, where Victor arrived precisely on time, his composed demeanor never wavering. I've decided to accept your proposal, Lila said, her voice steady despite her nerves. But I have conditions. Victor raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Go on. First, I want everything in writing. No loopholes, no vague promises. Second, I retain creative control over the exhibit. If this is going to happen, it will represent my vision, not your company's branding. Victor leaned back, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. I can agree to those terms. Lila studied him, searching for signs of deception, but his expression remained unreadable. Then we have a deal, she said, extending her hand. Victor shook it, his grip firm. I think this is the beginning of an interesting partnership. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Victor arranged for a team of contractors to begin minor renovations on the gallery, and Lila found herself working closely with him to plan the exhibit. Their collaboration was tense at first, each trying to assert control, but as the days passed, an uneasy camaraderie began to form. Victor proved to be surprisingly knowledgeable about art, and his suggestions, while initially unwelcome, often had merit. Lila, despite herself, found moments of genuine respect for him. One afternoon, as they reviewed the exhibit layout, Lila glanced at him and said, "You're full of surprises, Mr. Morgan." Victor smirked. "I'll take that as a compliment. Don't let it go to your head," she retorted, though her tone was lighter than before. The gallery buzzed with quiet activity. Contractors moved between scaffolding and fresh coats of paint while Lila supervised, clipboard in hand. The charity exhibit was taking shape, and with each passing day, her gallery began to feel like a revitalized version of itself. Yet, the sight of Victor Morgan standing near the front window, calmly fielding calls and offering suggestions, was a reminder of the uneasy alliance she had accepted. Victor's ability to command a room, even in silence, irritated Lila more than she cared to admit. He moved with the confidence of someone used to getting his way. Every suggestion he made for the exhibit, though undeniably practical, came with an undertone of authority that rankled her. She glanced at him now, his attention focused on his phone. What does someone like him even see in a project like this? She wondered, still suspicious of his motivations. The thought was interrupted by Sophia's arrival, her usual energy filling the room. "I come bearing coffee and updates," Sophia said, holding up a tray. She set it on the counter and handed Lila a cup. "How's our friendly corporate overlord treating you?" "About as well as you'd expect," Lila muttered, taking a sip. Sophia's eyes darted to Victor. "I'll get him this. He looks more involved than most CEOs I've seen. Maybe he's actually trying." Lila raised an eyebrow. "Trying to what? Redeem himself? Save face? Either way, he's still a Morgan." Sophia smirked. "You might want to let go of the chip on your shoulder before it crushes you." Before Lila could reply, Victor approached. "Good morning, Ms. Reed," he said, nodding politely. "Mr. Morgan," Sophia replied, her tone saccharine. Victor's attention turned to Lila. "I spoke with the event coordinator. They'll need the finalized list of featured pieces by tomorrow. Can we review it today?" Lila sighed. "Fine. Let me wrap up here, and I'll meet you in the back." Victor nodded and walked away, his expression unreadable. Sophia leaned closer to Lila. "You know, for a corporate overlord, he's not half bad." Lila shot her a glare. "Don't start." That afternoon, Lila and Victor sat in the back room, reviewing the list of paintings for the exhibit. The discussion started civilly enough, but tensions quickly surfaced when Victor suggested including a controversial piece from Lila's earlier work, a raw, emotional painting that she had buried in storage. "This piece is striking," Victor said, sliding the image across the table. "It's personal," Lila countered, crossing her arms. "That's why it belongs in the exhibit," Victor insisted. "It tells a story, and stories resonate with people. Isn't that the point?" Lila hesitated, her emotions warring with her instincts. He wasn't wrong, but exposing that part of herself felt risky. "I'll think about it," she said finally, her voice tight. Victor nodded, sensing her discomfort. "That's all I ask." Later that evening, as the contractors packed up for the day, Lila lingered in the gallery. The painting Victor had suggested lay on the table before her, its vivid reds and blacks seeming to pulse with the emotions she had poured into it. She hated that he was right. The piece was powerful, and it could elevate the exhibit. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps. She turned to see Victor standing in the doorway, his tie loosened and his posture relaxed. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. Lila smirked faintly. "Something like that." He walked over and studied the painting in silence. "This piece," he said softly, "it's haunting." "Not exactly the compliment I was hoping for," Lila quipped. Victor chuckled. "I meant it as a good thing. It's honest. That's rare." For a moment, their usual antagonism faded, replaced by a quiet understanding. The first whispers of dissent began the morning after the gallery announced the upcoming exhibit. A small but vocal group of townspeople gathered outside the gallery, their signs and raised voices accusing Lila of betraying the community by collaborating with Morgan Enterprises. Inside, Lila paced the floor, her stomach twisting in knots. Victor stood nearby, his arms crossed as he watched the scene unfold. "This is my fault," Lila said, her voice tight. "They think I've sold out." Victor shook his head. This was always going to happen. People resist change, even when it's for the better. Lila turned to him, frustration bubbling over. "You don't understand. This isn't just about the gallery. This town has been burned before by corporations like yours. They think I've handed them the matches." Victor met her gaze evenly. "Then prove them wrong." Determined to salvage her reputation, Lila spent the next week visiting local businesses and community leaders, explaining her reasons for accepting Victor's help. Some listened, others refused to hear her out. The hostility weighed heavily on her, but she pushed through, refusing to let their doubts break her resolve. Meanwhile, Victor dealt with pressure from his father, Richard Morgan, who was unhappy with the delay in the project's timeline. "You're wasting time and resources on sentimentality," Richard said during a tense phone call. "I'm building goodwill," Victor replied. "That has long-term value." Richard scoffed. "Goodwill doesn't pay the bills. Don't forget why you're in that town, Victor. Stick to the plan." Victor hung up, his jaw clenched. His father's words echoed in his mind, a constant reminder of the expectations he had spent his life trying to escape. The tension between Lila and the community reached a boiling point during a town hall meeting. Lila stood at the podium, facing a crowd of skeptical faces. Sophia sat in the front row, offering a reassuring nod, while Victor stood at the back, observing silently. "This gallery isn't just a building," Lila began. "It's a piece of our history, and it's my life's work. I know some of you think I've sold out, but I made this decision to save what matters most." A man in the crowd shouted, "By letting the Morgans buy their way into our town." Lila took a steadying breath. "This isn't about them. It's about us. This exhibit is an opportunity to bring attention to our town and our artists. If we succeed, it could mean a brighter future for all of us." The room was silent for a moment before another voice spoke up, an older woman who had been a patron of the gallery for years. "She's right," the woman said. "Lila's always put her heart into this place. If she believes in this, maybe we should too." The tension in the room eased slightly, but Lila knew the battle was far from over. Back at the gallery that evening, Lila found Victor waiting for her. "You handle that well," he said, his tone sincere. "Not well enough," she replied. "Half the town still hates me." Victor leaned against the counter. "You can't change everyone's mind overnight, but you've planted a seed. That's a start." Lila studied him for a moment, caught off guard by the softness in his expression. "Thanks," she said quietly. Victor nodded, a faint smile playing at his lips. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's another fight." Victor Morgan sat alone in his temporary office, the sharp click of his pen the only sound in the room. The dim light from the desk lamp cast long shadows across the neatly arranged folders in front of him. One folder, marked with the name Thompson Art Gallery, lay slightly ajar. Inside were reports, schedules, and financial projections tied to the redevelopment project. The words blurred as Victor's thoughts drifted. His phone buzzed, snapping him back to reality. It was his father. "Victor," Richard Morgan's voice was sharp and direct. "What's this I'm hearing about delays on Phase 2? The Thompson Gallery should have been rubble by now." Victor's jaw tightened. "The gallery is an opportunity to generate goodwill with the community. It's good for the project long term. Goodwill doesn't bring profits," Richard snapped. "Stop wasting time. If they can't be bought, bulldoze them." End of discussion. Victor ended the call, his chest tight. His father's words were a reminder of the pressure he faced, not just to deliver results, but to do so on the terms of a man who valued power over principle. Across town, Lila walked through her gallery, taking in the progress made over the past weeks. The once faded walls now gleamed with fresh paint, and new lighting fixtures highlighted her father's legacy pieces. For the first time in months, she felt a flicker of hope. That flicker dimmed when Sophia stormed in, her expression grim. "We've got a problem," she said, holding up a printed flyer. It was a notice for a competing event. A rival gallery was hosting its own charity auction the same night as Lila's exhibit. "They're trying to sabotage you," Sophia said. Lila sank into a chair, the weight of the setback hitting her like a wave. "How am I supposed to compete with that?" "You don't compete." Victor's voice came from the doorway. He stepped into the room, his calm demeanor contrasting sharply with Lila's frustration. Lila narrowed her eyes. "And what do you suggest?" "Let them win." Victor shook his head. "You double down. Make your exhibit impossible to ignore. If they're trying to draw attention away, It means they see you as a threat. Lila hesitated, her emotions warring with her instincts. Victor's confidence was maddening, but he had a point. "What do you have in mind?" she asked reluctantly. Victor's lips curved into a faint smile. "Let's talk strategy." For the next several hours, Lila, Victor, and Sophia brainstormed ways to elevate the exhibit. Victor suggested inviting high-profile art critics, while Sophia focused on leveraging social media to amplify the gallery's reach. "We need something that'll make people talk," Sophia said. Victor leaned back in his chair, his gaze thoughtful. "What about centerpiece? Something bold, controversial even." Lila tensed. "You mean the painting you suggested before?" Victor nodded. "It's powerful. It'll draw attention." Lila's instinct was to refuse, but the memory of the townspeople's skepticism lingered. If she wanted to prove herself and the gallery's worth, maybe she needed to take a risk. "Fine," she said finally, "but this better work." The gallery was quiet when Lila arrived early the next morning. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft orange glow through the windows. She walked to the storage room, her steps echoing in the stillness. The painting Victor had suggested sat propped against the wall, its colors as vivid as the day she had finished it. It was a deeply personal piece, born out of a time when she had felt lost and uncertain. To display it now felt like exposing a wound to the world. As she stared at it, memory surfaced of late nights in her father's studio, of his steady encouragement as she struggled to find her voice as an artist. He had always believed in her, even when she didn't believe in herself. "You're doing the right thing." Lila turned to see Victor standing in the doorway, his presence somehow both startling and steadying. "I didn't realize you were here," she said. "I wanted to check on the progress," he replied. "But I can leave if you'd prefer." Lila shook her head. "It's fine." She gestured to the painting. "This piece, it's not just a painting. It's a part of me." Victor stepped closer, his gaze thoughtful. "That's why it'll resonate. People connect with honesty." Lila studied him, searching for ulterior motives, but his expression was sincere. "Sometimes," he added, "the things that scare us the most are the things that have the most power." His words lingered as Lila carefully carried the painting to the main gallery. As the exhibit approached, preparations intensified. Invitations were sent, the gallery was polished to perfection, and Lila worked tirelessly to curate the final details. Despite her initial doubts, Victor proved to be an invaluable ally. His experience in high-stakes negotiations translated seamlessly into organizing a standout event. But not everyone was on board. During a late-night meeting, Sophia voiced her concerns. "I know you think Victor's on your side, but don't forget who he works for. The Morgans aren't exactly known for their altruism." Lila sighed. "I know, but he's done more to help me than anyone else has." Sophia crossed her arms. "Just be careful, Lila. Don't let your guard down." The night before the exhibit, Lila found herself alone in the gallery. The centerpiece painting hung prominently in the center of the room, illuminated by soft, golden light. She stared at it, her emotions a tangled mess of pride, fear, and anticipation. Victor entered quietly, his usual polished demeanor replaced by something softer. "You've done something incredible here," he said. "Not alone," Lila admitted. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the journey they had shared hanging between them. "Tomorrow's a big day," Victor said finally. "Get some rest. You'll need it." Lila nodded, her gaze never leaving the painting. "Thank you, Victor, for everything." He inclined his head, and for the first time, Lila felt a glimmer of trust. The morning of the exhibit dawned crisp and clear, the golden sunlight streaming through the gallery's windows like a promise of hope. Lila stood in the center of the space, taking in the transformation. The gallery looked nothing like the worn, struggling space it had been just weeks ago. Polished floors gleamed, vibrant paintings adorned the walls, and the centerpiece painting stood in its place of honor, drawing every eye to its raw intensity. "Not bad," Sophia said, stepping into the room with 2 steaming cups of coffee. "You've outdone yourself." Lila smiled faintly. though her nerves were frayed. It's not over yet. Tonight will either make or break this place. Sophia handed her a cup. Stop worrying. You've done everything right. People will see that. Lila wanted to believe her, but the weight of the evening pressed heavily on her chest. By mid-afternoon, the gallery buzzed with activity. Caterers set up elegant spreads of hors d'oeuvres, floral arrangements arrived, and the final touches on lighting were adjusted. Victor arrived shortly after, exuding his usual calm composure. Everything's on schedule, he said, checking the event itinerary. Critics from the major art publications are confirmed, and ticket sales are higher than projected. Lila nodded, though his efficiency only heightened her nerves. What about the rival gallery's event? Victor's expression tightened slightly. They're struggling to draw attention. Don't let them distract you. Focus on tonight. As the afternoon wore on, Lila's confidence grew, until a phone call shattered her fragile calm. The call came from one of her contractors. Lila, we've got a problem, the voice said, breathless and urgent. There's been a power outage at the gallery. Looks like the circuit blew. What? How? Lila demanded, panic rising. We're not sure, but it doesn't look accidental. Lila's stomach dropped. Someone had sabotaged her event. Victor found her minutes later, pacing the gallery with her phone pressed to her ear. What happened? He asked, his tone sharp. Someone sabotaged the power, Lila said, her voice tight with frustration. The gallery's running on backup lights, but it's not enough. Victor's jaw clenched. I'll handle it. How? Lila snapped. The event starts in a few hours. Victor met her gaze evenly. Trust me. Victor worked quickly, leveraging his network to bring in electricians and backup generators. While they worked to restore full power, Lila focused on keeping her team calm and preparing for the worst. By the time evening fell, the gallery was back online, the lights brighter than ever. You pulled off, Lila said as Victor approached her. Teamwork, he replied with a faint smile. Despite the relief of the restored power, the incident left Lila shaken. The stakes were higher than ever, and the margin for error was razor-thin. As the evening began, guests trickled into the gallery, their murmurs of admiration filling the space. The paintings gleamed under the carefully positioned lights, and the air buzzed with anticipation. Lila greeted each guest personally, her nerves steadying as the positive reactions rolled in. Victor stayed near the entrance, his sharp eyes scanning the room. He was more than just an observer. His presence radiated authority, subtly ensuring everything ran smoothly. You've got this, Sophia whispered to Lila, giving her arm a reassuring squeeze before disappearing into the crowd. Lila nodded, but her eyes kept drifting to Victor. He seemed out of place among the artists and critics, yet somehow integral to the evening's success. Midway through the event, the centerpiece painting was unveiled. A hush fell over the room as guests gathered around it, their reactions ranging from awe to quiet reflection. One critic, an older man with a sharp gaze, approached Lila. This piece, it's extraordinary, raw, emotional, and unflinching. Where did the inspiration come from? Lila hesitated, her heart pounding. It's personal, she said softly. Personal is what moves people, the critic replied. You have a gift. The words left her stunned. She glanced at Victor, who watched her from across the room, his expression unreadable. As the night progressed, Lila found herself drawn into deeper conversations with the guests, many of whom praised her vision and the gallery's transformation. For the first time in months, she felt a flicker of pride and validation. Victor approached her near the end of the evening. His usual guarded demeanor softened. Congratulations, he said. You've done something remarkable here. So have you, Lila replied, her voice quiet. Victor tilted his head, his gaze searching hers. Do you believe that now? Lila hesitated, then nodded. I think I'm starting to. The moment stretched between them, charged with something unspoken. As the last guests departed, Lila stood in the center of the gallery, surveying the space. The night had been a success, but the journey was far from over. Victor lingered nearby, his presence steady and reassuring. "You should get some rest," he said. "So should you," Lila countered. Victor chuckled softly. "I'll take that under advisement." For the first time, Lila felt a fragile sense of trust forming between them, a bond forged not by necessity, but by shared purpose. The gallery had returned to its usual quiet hum, but the energy from the exhibit lingered in the air. Lila sat at her office, a mug of tea cooling beside her as she sorted through the glowing reviews the event had garnered. Articles from prominent critics praised her vision, some even naming her gallery the heart of the town's artistic resurgence. She should have felt triumphant, but something gnawed at the edges of her mind. Sophia entered the office, her expression unusually serious. "Got a minute?" she asked, closing the door behind her. Lila glanced up, frowning. "What's wrong?" Sophia held out a folder. "I've been digging into Morgan Enterprises, specifically the redevelopment projects Victor has been involved in. You need to see this." Reluctantly, Lila took the folder and opened it. The documents detailed internal memos and financial decisions tied to Victor's earlier days at the company. One memo, in particular, stood out, a rejection of an artist partnership proposal with her name attached. Lila's heart sank. This is me." Sophia nodded grimly. "Victor was part of the decision-making team that shut down your partnership application years ago." The revelation hit like a punch to the gut. Lila stared at the memo, her chest tightening. The humiliation of that rejection, the struggle to rebuild her career, it all came rushing back. And Victor had been part of it. Sophia placed a hand on her shoulder. "I know this is a lot, but you need to confront him. He's been keeping this from you." That evening, Victor arrived at the gallery for a scheduled follow-up meeting. Lila greeted him with a cool demeanor, her usual warmth replaced by a cold edge. "Everything all right?" he asked, sensing the shift in her tone. "No," Lila said sharply, holding up the memo. "Did you think I wouldn't find out?" Victor's eyes widened as he recognized the document. "Lila, let me explain. You were part of the team that crushed my career," she shouted, her voice trembling with anger. "You knew what this meant to me, and you kept it a secret." Victor took a step closer, his expression earnest. "I didn't know who you were back then. I was new to the company, following orders. It wasn't personal." "It wasn't personal to you," Lila shot back. "But it was everything to me." For a moment, silence hung between them, heavy with unspoken emotions. Finally, Victor said, "You're right. I should have told you, but I'm trying to make things right now." Lila shook her head. "I don't know if I can trust you anymore." Victor's face fell, but he nodded. "If you need space, I'll respect that. Just know that I didn't come here to hurt you, Lila." As he left, Lila's anger gave way to a deeper, more painful feeling: betrayal. The days that followed were tense and uncertain. Lila threw herself into her work, avoiding thoughts of Victor and focusing on the gallery's momentum. The community's support had grown since the exhibit, and her schedule was filled with new opportunities. Yet, the betrayal lingered, casting a shadow over her achievements. Sophia stayed close, offering her usual blunt advice. "You need to decide what's more important, holding on to this anger or figuring out if Victor's actions now outweigh his mistakes then." Lila frowned. "It's not that simple." "Maybe not," Sophia conceded, "but it's worth asking yourself. People can change, Lila. You've seen that." Meanwhile, Victor faced his own reckoning. His father, Richard Morgan, had caught wind of the gallery's success and wasn't pleased. "You've wasted time and resources on this pet project," Richard barked during a video call. "I trusted you to handle this redevelopment efficiently." Victor squared his shoulders, his voice calm but firm. "The gallery is an asset to the community. Destroying it would have done more harm than good. Since when do you care about goodwill?" Richard sneered. "This isn't about the gallery. It's about that woman." Victor's jaw tightened. "I care because it's the right thing to do. And if you can't see the value in that, maybe it's time I reevaluate my role in this company." Richard's eyes narrowed. "Careful, Victor. Don't forget who built your career." Victor ended the call without another word, his hands clenched into fists. For the first time, he realized how deeply his father's shadow loomed over his life. And for the first time, he felt ready to step out from under it. Back at the gallery, Lila received an unexpected visitor. An older woman, elegant and composed, introduced herself as a former partner of Morgan Enterprises. She carried an air of quiet authority and handed Lila a sealed envelope. "What's this?" Lila asked, puzzled. "Something you should know," the woman said cryptically. "Victor doesn't know I'm here, but I thought you deserved the truth." When Lila opened the envelope, she found a series of letters and memos from years ago. They detailed Victor's efforts to fight for her partnership application, only to be overruled by his superiors. One letter, written in Victor's own hand, expressed regret for the decision and admiration for her work. Lila's heart twisted. The betrayal she'd felt began to unravel, replaced by a mix of guilt and confusion. Had she misjudged him? That evening, Lila found herself standing outside Victor's office. She hadn't planned to come, but the letters had shaken her resolve. Taking a deep breath, she knocked. Victor opened the door, surprise flickering across his face. "Lila, we need to talk," she said. Inside, she placed the letters on his desk. "Why didn't you tell me about this?" Victor glanced at the letters, his expression softening. "Because I didn't think it mattered. I failed you back then, Lila. That's the truth. But you tried," Lila said, her voice quiet. "You didn't have to, but you did." Victor met her gaze. "I wanted to make it right, even if you never knew. And I'll keep trying, if you'll let me." For the first time in days, Lila felt a sliver of the trust they'd built begin to return. "I'm not saying I forgive you," she said, "but maybe we can start over." Victor nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. "I'd like that." Victor Morgan stood in his office, staring out the window as rain traced delicate patterns on the glass. The air was heavy with tension, a reflection of the storm brewing inside him. The fallout with his father after their last confrontation lingered like an unhealed wound. Richard Morgan's words still echoed in his mind, barbed, biting, and laced with threats. The knock on his door broke his reverie. His assistant, Simon, stepped in, his usual composure shaken. "Sir," Simon began hesitantly, "your father's legal team has issued a formal challenge to the gallery agreement. He's claiming your decision violates company policy." Victor's hands clenched into fists. "Of course he is. He's demanding the termination of all financial support for the project," Simon continued. "Effective immediately." Victor's jaw tightened, his mind racing. The gallery wasn't just a project anymore. It had become a symbol of his break from his father's ruthless methods. Losing it now would undo everything he'd fought for. "Schedule a meeting with the board," Victor said. "If my father wants a fight, he'll get one." Meanwhile, at the gallery, Lila reviewed upcoming exhibit plans with Sophia. The event's success had drawn new opportunities, including collaborations with other artists and local businesses. Yet, beneath the surface, a lingering unease gnawed at her. Sophia noticed her distraction and set down her coffee. "What's on your mind?" Lila sighed. "Victor, I want to trust him, but every time I do, something comes up to remind me how much power his family has over this town and over me." Sophia nodded, her expression thoughtful. "You've come this far by fighting for what matters. If he's really on your side, he'll prove it. But you need to decide if he's worth the risk." Before Lila could respond, the gallery door opened. Victor stepped inside, his face etched with determination. "We need to talk," he said. Lila's stomach tightened. "What's going on?" Victor hesitated, then said, "My father's trying to cut all funding for the gallery. He's leveraging company policy to undermine our agreement." The news hit like a blow. "So, what does that mean for us?" "It means I'm going to fight this," Victor said firmly. "But I need your help." Lila crossed her arms, wary. "How?" Victor met her gaze. "By standing with me. If we present a united front, it'll make it harder for him to tear this apart." Lila's instinct was to retreat, to protect herself and her gallery from further entanglement. But she saw something in Victor's eyes, an earnestness that hinted at how much this fight meant to him. "Fine," she said. "But if this goes wrong, we both lose everything." Victor nodded. "I won't let that happen." The boardroom of Morgan Enterprises was a stark contrast to the warm, inviting space of the gallery. The walls were lined with polished wood, and the air buzzed with the quiet tension of corporate politics. Victor sat at the head of the table, flanked by a handful of allies. Across from him sat his father, Richard, his presence as commanding as ever. "This meeting is a waste of time," Richard said, his tone dripping with disdain. "Victor's little pet project is bleeding resources. It's a liability to the company." Victor's expression remained calm, but his knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the table. "The gallery isn't a liability. It's an investment in the community, and the community's trust is invaluable." Richard scoffed. "Trust doesn't pay dividends. You're jeopardizing the future of this company for sentimentality." Before Victor could respond, Lila stood. She had been silent until now, observing the room and gauging the dynamics. "With all due respect, Mr. Morgan," she began, her voice steady, "this isn't about sentimentality. It's about values. The gallery represents more than just art. It's a cornerstone of this town's identity. Supporting it isn't just the right thing to do. It's smart business." The room fell silent, all eyes on her. Even Richard looked momentarily taken aback. "And what makes you think your little gallery is worth this company's resources?" he challenged. Lila met his gaze, unflinching. "Because people don't invest in buildings. They invest in stories, in legacies. That's what the gallery offers. And if you destroy that, you destroy the trust this community has in your name." Richard leaned back, his eyes narrowing. "You've got fire. I'll give you that." Victor seized the moment. "This isn't just about one gallery. It's about the direction of this company. We can either continue bulldozing through communities or start building relationships. One of those options has a future. The other doesn't." The meeting ended without a resolution, but Victor and Lila had made their case. As they left the building, Lila turned to him. "Do you think it worked?" she asked. Victor exhaled, his shoulders relaxing slightly. "It's a start. My father doesn't back down easily, but he respects strength. You showed that today." Lila gave a small smile. "I'm just trying to save what matters." "So am I," Victor said softly. That evening, as they walked through the gallery, Lila felt the weight of the day begin to lift. Victor's willingness to stand against his father had proven his loyalty, at least for now. "Thank you," she said quietly. Victor glanced at her, a flicker of vulnerability crossing his face. "For what?" "For not giving up," Lila replied. Victor smiled, the tension in his posture easing. "I think we're both learning how to fight for what matters." The gallery buzzed with activity as volunteers and local artists worked to prepare for a town-wide art auction. Lila moved between stations, organizing canvases, checking lighting, and ensuring every detail was perfect. The auction had been Victor's idea, a way to rally the town and secure enough funding to ensure the gallery's survival, no matter the outcome of the battle with Morgan Enterprises. "Lila, where do you want this?" a young artist called, holding up a framed painting. "Over there, by the north wall," Lila said, gesturing. Her voice carried authority, but her mind raced with worry. Despite the outpouring of support from the community, doubts lingered. Would it be enough? Could they truly stand against the forces trying to dismantle everything she'd worked for? Sophia entered the gallery, carrying a box of promotional flyers. "This place looks incredible," she said, setting the box on a table. The town's buzzing about the auction. Lila managed a small smile. "Let's hope the buzz translates to bids. We need this to be a success." Sophia glanced at her, reading the worry beneath the surface. "You're doing everything right, Lila. People believe in you. And in this gallery." Lila nodded, though the knot in her stomach remained. Victor arrived later that afternoon, his presence a mix of calm and energy that seemed to steady Lila's nerves. He moved through the space, offering practical suggestions and encouraging words to the volunteers. Despite their rocky history, Lila had to admit that his ability to lead was invaluable. "This is coming together nicely," Victor said as he joined Lila near the front of the gallery. It has to, she replied. There's no room for failure. Victor studied her for a moment. You've already won over this community, Lila. Tonight is just a reminder of why they've stood by you. His words, though simple, carried a sincerity that eased her tension. Thank you, she said softly. As the evening approached, the gallery filled with guests. Locals mingled with collectors and critics, their conversations creating a lively hum. The centerpiece painting, displayed prominently in the main hall, drew admiration from everyone who passed it. Lila stood near the entrance, greeting guests and accepting compliments on the gallery's transformation. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself a flicker of hope. The auction began with a spirited energy, the bids climbing higher with each new piece presented. Sophia worked the room, engaging with bidders and ensuring the energy remained high. Lila, meanwhile, kept her focus on the proceedings, her hands gripping the clipboard that tracked the night's totals. Victor remained at her side, offering quiet reassurance as the numbers added up. By the halfway point, they had already exceeded their initial goal. This is incredible, Lila said, her voice filled with disbelief. Victor smiled. I told you, you've already won them over. As the auction neared its conclusion, Lila took the stage to thank the attendees. Her voice trembled at first, but as she spoke about the gallery's history and its importance to the community, her confidence grew. This gallery isn't just a building, she said. It's a home for creativity, for connection, and for the stories that define us. Tonight, you've shown that those things matter. Thank you. The room erupted in applause, and for the first time, in what felt like forever, Lila felt truly supported. The glow of the auction's success lingered as the last guests left the gallery. Volunteers stayed behind to help clean up, their chatter filled with excitement over the night's results. Lila and Victor stood in the center of the space, surveying the aftermath. You did it, Victor said, his voice warm. This gallery is secure. We did it, Lila corrected, a small smile tugging at her lips. Before Victor could respond, a loud crash from the back room shattered the moment. Both turned toward the sound, their bodies tensing. What was that? Lila whispered, her voice edged with fear. Victor moved quickly, leading the way as they approached the storage area. The smell of smoke hit them first, acrid and unmistakable. Oh my God, Lila breathed, her eyes widening as flames licked up the side of a storage shelf. Call the fire department. Victor barked, grabbing a nearby fire extinguisher. Lila scrambled for her phone, her hands shaking as she dialed. There's a fire at Thompson Art Gallery, she said, her voice trembling. We need help. Victor worked to contain the flames, but they spread quickly, fueled by the flammable materials stored in the room. Within minutes, the fire had consumed half the space, forcing them to retreat. Volunteers rushed to help, but the fire was relentless. By the time the firefighters arrived, the damage was extensive. Hours later, Lila stood outside the charred remains of the gallery, her heart breaking as she took in the destruction. The building that had housed so many memories, so much hope, was now little more than ash and rubble. Victor stood beside her, his face grim. We'll rebuild, he said, his voice firm. Lila shook her head, tears streaming down her face. It's not just the building, Victor. It's everything. The paintings, the history. Everything's gone. Not everything, he said, turning her to face him. The spirit of this gallery isn't in the walls. It's in you. And as long as you're willing to fight, we can bring it back. Lila wanted to believe him, but the weight of the loss felt insurmountable. She turned back to the ruins, her mind racing with questions. Who could have done this? And why? The next day, investigators confirmed what Victor and Lila had feared. The fire was no accident. Evidence pointed to arson, and suspicion quickly fell on Morgan Enterprises. Lila confronted Victor, her anger flaring. Did your father do this? She demanded, her voice sharp. Victor's expression darkened. I wouldn't put it past him, but I'll find out. You better, Lila said, her voice trembling. Because if he did, this fight isn't over. Victor nodded, determination hardening his features. "It's not over," he said. Not by a long shot. The morning after the fire, the gallery stood as a blackened shell of its former self. The once vivid walls, adorned with artwork, were now charred and crumbling. The acrid smell of smoke lingered in the air as Lila stood on the sidewalk, staring at the wreckage. Around her, the town was eerily quiet, the usual hustle of the morning subdued as the community processed the loss. Sophia arrived, her expression grim but determined. "Hey," she said softly, placing a hand on Lila's shoulder. Lila didn't turn, her eyes locked on the ruins. "It's all gone," she whispered. "No, it's not," Sophia said firmly. "The building's gone, sure, but your vision, your passion, that's still here. And so are we." Behind them, a few townspeople began gathering, some holding flowers, others simply offering their presence. One by one, they approached Lila, sharing quiet words of support. "We'll rebuild this," said Mrs. Harper, the elderly woman who had attended every exhibit since the gallery opened. "Count on me to help," added a young artist, clutching a canvas smeared with soot. The words chipped away at the numbness gripping Lila's heart. For the first time since the fire, she felt a flicker of hope. Victor arrived shortly after, his sharp suit replaced by casual clothes that seemed out of place on him but matched the somber mood. His expression was a mixture of guilt and determination. "Lila," he said, stepping closer. She turned to him, her face a mask of exhaustion. "Did you find out anything?" Victor nodded. The investigators confirmed it was arson, and the evidence points to someone connected to Morgan Enterprises. Her chest tightened. "Your father." Victor hesitated, then shook his head. "I can't prove it was him directly, but it fits his pattern. I've already started gathering evidence. If he's behind this, I'll make sure he's held accountable." Lila's jaw clenched, anger simmering beneath the surface. "This isn't just about the gallery, Victor. This was my father's legacy, my life's work. And I won't stop until we make it right," Victor said, his voice steady. In the days that followed, the community rallied around Lila. Fundraisers were organized, donations poured in, and volunteers offered their skills to help clear the debris. Lila worked tirelessly alongside them, her hands blistered and her body aching, but her spirit slowly mending. Victor was a constant presence, using his connections to secure materials and expedite permits. Despite the tension between them, Lila couldn't deny his commitment. One evening, as they stood in the ruins of the gallery, Victor handed her a blueprint. "This is what I've been working on," he said. Lila unfolded the paper, her breath catching as she took in the detailed plans for a new gallery. The design was modern yet retained elements of the original structure, blending old and new seamlessly. "It's perfect," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Victor met her gaze. "It's just the start. The rest is up to you." The reconstruction of the gallery became a town-wide effort. Every day, more people showed up to lend a hand, their support a testament to the impact Lila and her father had on the community. Sophia spearheaded a media campaign, drawing attention to the story of the gallery's destruction and the fight to rebuild. News outlets picked up the story, and donations began pouring in from outside the town. "This is bigger than just us now," Sophia said one afternoon, showing Lila the latest coverage. "People across the state are rooting for you." Lila smiled faintly, the weight of her grief slowly lifting. Victor, meanwhile, continued his investigation into the fire. His strained relationship with his father came to a head during a tense meeting at Morgan Enterprises. "You've gone too far," Victor said, slamming a file onto Richard's desk. The folder contained evidence tying one of the company's contractors to the arson. Richard didn't flinch. "You don't have proof it was me." Victor leaned forward, his voice low and firm. "Maybe not yet, but when I do, you'll be done." Richard smirked. "You're willing to destroy your family for a gallery." Victor straightened, his gaze unwavering. "This isn't about the gallery. It's about doing what's right, something you've forgotten." Back at the construction site, Lila oversaw the final stages of a rebuild. The new gallery was almost complete, and the sight of it filled her with a mix of pride and disbelief. Victor arrived with a donation check, his presence drawing the attention of the volunteers. "This should cover the remaining costs," he said, handing the check to Lila. She looked at the amount, her eyes widening. "Victor, this is too much. It's an investment," he said simply. "In you, in this town, and in everything this gallery represents." Lila's throat tightened as she pocketed the check. "Thank you," she said softly. Victor nodded, his expression unreadable. "I'm just glad I could help." On the day of the grand reopening, the gallery was a beacon of light in the center of the town. The new space was stunning, every detail carefully crafted to honor its history while embracing a brighter future. The event drew a crowd larger than Lila had ever seen, including critics, artists, and even some prominent figures from the art world. Victor stood in the back of the room, watching as Lila delivered a heartfelt speech. "This gallery has always been about more than just art," she said. "It's about resilience, community, and the stories that connect us all. None of this would have been possible without the support of this town and everyone who believed in us. Thank you." As the crowd erupted into applause, Lila met Victor's gaze from across the room. She nodded, a silent acknowledgement of everything they had endured together. The gallery stood tall once again, a testament to resilience and determination. Its grand reopening had been an overwhelming success, bringing together people from across the state and reigniting the town's artistic spirit. Yet, for all the triumphs, the shadow of Morgan Enterprises still loomed large. Victor sat in a corner office at Morgan Enterprises headquarters, the tension in the air palpable. Across from him, Richard Morgan leaned back in his chair, his expression smug. Between them lay a stack of documents that would determine the future of not just the gallery, but Victor's entire career. "You've put yourself in quite a position, Victor," Richard said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Going against your own family, tarnishing our reputation. All for what? A gallery that should have been rubble weeks ago." Victor met his father's gaze, unflinching. "This isn't just about the gallery. It's about how we do business, how we treat people. And it's about drawing the line somewhere." Richard smirked. "Do you think your little crusade will change anything? The board stands with me, Victor. You've overplayed your hand." Victor placed a folder on the desk, sliding it toward his father. "This says otherwise." Richard's smug demeanor faltered as he opened the folder. Inside were documents, emails, and testimonies tying Morgan Enterprises to unethical practices, including the arson that had destroyed the gallery. Victor leaned forward, his voice low and steady. "I've spent weeks gathering this evidence. If you think I won't take it to the authorities, you don't know me at all." Richard's face darkened. "You destroy this company over a personal vendetta." "This isn't personal," Victor said firmly. "It's about accountability, and I'm giving you a choice. Step down quietly, or I'll make sure everyone sees what kind of man you are." For a moment, the room was silent, the weight of Victor's words settling over them like a storm cloud. Meanwhile, Lila was at the gallery, reviewing plans for an upcoming exhibit. The success of the reopening had brought a flood of opportunities, but her focus remained on ensuring the gallery stayed true to its roots. Sophia entered, her expression a mix of excitement and curiosity. "You won't believe the buzz this place is getting. People are calling it the heart of the town." Lila smiled, though her thoughts drifted to Victor. He had been absent for days, and while she understood the stakes he was facing, she couldn't help but worry. "I just hope all of this wasn't for nothing," Lila said softly. Sophia placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "If anyone can handle Richard Morgan, it's Victor. He's proven that much." Later that evening, Victor arrived at the gallery, his expression weary but triumphant. "It's done," he said, his voice heavy with relief. "My father's stepping down. He won't be interfering anymore." Lila's eyes widened. "Victor, that's huge." He nodded. "The board sided with me. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary." For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of the journey they'd shared settling over them. "Thank you," Lila said finally, her voice thick with emotion, "for everything Victor smiled faintly. You don't need to thank me, Lila. This was your fight as much as mine. The gallery stood tall once again, a testament to resilience and determination. Its grand reopening had been an overwhelming success, bringing together people from across the state and reigniting the town's artistic spirit. Yet, for all the triumphs, the shadow of Morgan Enterprises still loomed large. Victor sat in a corner office at Morgan Enterprises headquarters, the tension in the air palpable. Across from him, Richard Morgan leaned back in his chair, his expression smug. Between them lay a stack of documents that would determine the future of not just the gallery, but Victor's entire career. You've put yourself in quite a position, Victor, Richard said, his voice dripping with condescension. Going against your own family, tarnishing our reputation. All for what? A gallery that should have been rubble weeks ago. Victor met his father's gaze, unflinching. This isn't just about the gallery. It's about how we do business, how we treat people. And it's about drawing the line somewhere. Richard smirked. Do you think your little crusade will change anything? The board stands with me, Victor. You've overplayed your hand. Victor placed a folder on the desk, sliding it toward his father. This says otherwise. Richard's smug demeanor faltered as he opened the folder. Inside were documents, emails, and testimonies tying Morgan Enterprises to unethical practices, including the arson that had destroyed the gallery. Victor leaned forward, his voice low and steady. I've spent weeks gathering this evidence. If you think I won't take it to the authorities, you don't know me at all. Richard's face darkened. You destroy this company over a personal vendetta. This isn't personal, Victor said firmly. It's about accountability, and I'm giving you a choice. Step down quietly, or I'll make sure everyone sees what kind of man you are. For a moment, the room was silent, the weight of Victor's words settling over them like a storm cloud. Meanwhile, Lila was at the gallery, reviewing plans for an upcoming exhibit. The success of the reopening had brought a flood of opportunities, but her focus remained on ensuring the gallery stayed true to its roots. Sophia entered, her expression a mix of excitement and curiosity. You won't believe the buzz this place is getting. People are calling it the heart of the town. Lila smiled, though her thoughts drifted to Victor. He had been absent for days, and while she understood the stakes he was facing, she couldn't help but worry. I just hope all of this wasn't for nothing, Lila said softly. Sophia placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. If anyone can handle Richard Morgan, it's Victor. He's proven that much. Later that evening, Victor arrived at the gallery, his expression weary but triumphant. It's done, he said, his voice heavy with relief. My father's stepping down. He won't be interfering anymore. Lila's eyes widened. Victor? That's huge. He nodded. The board sided with me. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of the journey they'd shared settling over them. Thank you, Lila said finally, her voice thick with emotion. For everything. Victor smiled faintly. You don't need to thank me, Lila. This was your fight as much as mine. Months later, the gallery was thriving. The space was filled with vibrant art, laughter, and the hum of creativity. Lila had launched several community initiatives, bringing together artists, students, and residents to celebrate the power of expression. Victor had left Morgan Enterprises, using his resources to establish a foundation dedicated to supporting local businesses and the arts. His relationship with Lila had deepened, built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared purpose. One afternoon, Lila stood in the gallery, watching as children painted in a workshop she had organized. The sight filled her with pride and a sense of fulfillment she hadn't felt in years. Victor approached, holding 2 cups of coffee. Looks like your vision is coming to life, he said, handing her a cup. Lila smiled. Our vision, she corrected. Victor chuckled. Fair enough. As they stood together, the future stretched out before them, filled with possibility. The gallery was more than just a building now. It was a symbol of resilience, community, and the power of standing up for what mattered. Hey there, storytellers. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more captivating tales, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. It really helps us bring more amazing content your way. We'd love to hear from you. What part of the story impacted you the most? Was it a specific moment, a character's growth, or the emotional twists? Let us know in the comments below. Also, we're always looking for fresh ideas. What kind of stories would you like to see on the channel? Drop your suggestions, and who knows, your idea could inspire our next big narrative. Thank you for being a part of this journey. Your support means the world to us. Let me know if you'd like to tweak this message or make it even more specific to your channels.